Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In this one we're going to be creating a loading screen with, by using buttons. We're going to go to the other scene. We're going to display on a slider the progress we've got between loading, so the loading percentage, and then we can also display that in text if you want to have it say 50% loaded, or if you want it to just have a number that increases. It's up to you to design it. Maybe you want a nice fade into the loading screen and fade out, but that part's up to you. I'm just going to show you the basic way to set it up, and it should be beginner friendly as well. But obviously, some more advanced users, I wouldn't say this is advanced at all, but it's still very useful, and it's not beginner friendly in the sense that some of the syntaxing is slightly off. If you haven't seen coroutines before, then obviously I'd recommend going to look at those. I've got a video on that from a while back on my channel. Plenty of YouTubers have done videos on that. It's quite a useful thing in game development to have stuff run asynchronously. But anyway, I'll get into that when we get to it. I want to thank my patrons Paul Robinson, Philbaum and Wesley for their $5 donations on Discord. If anyone else wants to help support the channel, then the link is in the description below. So to do this loading scenes, you don't need a project already. I mean, if you're going to follow along, then you need a project, but you don't need anything specific. All I have is two scenes, scene 01 and scene 02. They're just scenes with some things in them. Doesn't matter, don't need event system or anything. Yeah, just two scenes that are different to load between. We got the preload scene, which is from my last video, which I highly recommend going to watch because it kind of leads onto this. You don't need to have done that one for this, but I very strongly recommend it. If you don't recognize some of the stuff I'm doing here, you might want to go watch the last one. But anyway, we have a script. Music manager's empty, just as a demonstration. DDOL is don't destroy and load. That's just stuck onto this object so that when we start the game and we're in scene preload and we press play, we actually go to the next scene, scene 01, which can be any scene, just put whatever scene you want next, and it will actually have the manager object still here in a separate part on the hierarchy. So what we want to do in this is we want to add a way to press a key or press a button to go to the other scene. Now obviously in your game you will have it in a different way. Most likely you might have maybe in your game when you reach the end of the level something calls load the scene, but the difference is there's two kinds of load scenes. So if we go look in our code in the scene loader, I currently have on the awake, so at the start, load scene 1. Now we could even just have load scene, well, what are the other options, scene name, build index, whatever. You could just go to load the next scene, but for now we'll just stick with loading scene 1. So when we start, we load the first scene. Well, the second scene technically, because the first scene is the preload scene, but if you've watched the last one, you'll get that. But what we want to do is, we want to have a scene that loads asynchronously. So by default, private void awake, in normal functions and code, the code will all execute, so it'll run this, it'll run all your other code in the game, it'll render everything, and then it gets shown on screen, and there's your frame that you see. And then your frame rate is, how many of those it does per second. And that can depend on quality of graphics, how difficult it is to render. But there's also code execution. If you write cleaner code and more efficient code, especially in big games, it'll make you have better frames per second, better FPS. Now, the thing is, there's two different kinds. So we've got synchronous, which is what we're doing now. Just run the code, render the scene, render the frame. Run the code, render the frame. But there's asynchronous, and what that means is that code is ran as well. It just runs it as fast as it can. It'll get it done when it can get it done. But it won't, the engine, I guess, won't wait for that to have happened before rendering the scene. I keep saying scene, frame. I mean, it's the same thing, I guess. It will just do it in its own time. Obviously, it's still going to do it as fast as it can. It's not just going to take longer because of this. But the benefit to it is that instead of load scene here, what it'll do is it'll basically pause your game. You won't render any more frames until it's loaded the scene, which if it's a big scene could take ages. If we load asynchronously, you can still keep playing the game, your game will still run, but in the background it's going to load the next scene. And as soon as it's finished loading all the scene data, it'll then actually take you to the scene, which lag-wise will seem much, you won't be there stuck on a freeze frame for ages. Now, the way we do this, instead of in an all function, it's different. It's called a coroutine. So if you haven't seen already, private IEnumerator is the way you would have a private one, and this, we'll call it load scene. It's going to take in an integer, actually, yeah, we'll take an integer, we'll call it index because it's like the scene index that we want to go to. Now, what we want from this is we want an actual function here, so public, so this is to be called by a button, public void load scene by index. So we'll have a button. Actually, no, we'll just have a load of a scene, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to hard code it if we're in scene 1 to go to scene 2, and if we're in scene 2 to go to scene 1, just for the sake of the tutorial. So we'll say if scene manager dot get current scene, or get active scene dot build index. So this is going to give us the number. We have to actually say something. If it's equal to 1, then we'll say loads. Oh, sorry. We have to do, for coroutines, you can't just call them like load scene. That won't actually work. You have to say start coroutine, like so. That's just the way it works. And what that means is if we're in scene 1 and we press a button, we're gonna load scene 2. We'll say else start coroutine load scene 1. Okay, that's just hard coded for this to work. So we're going to go between scene 2 and 1. Obviously, you start counting from 0 encoding, so this is like the second scene and the third scene. But because we got the preload scene, that's what it actually is. That's the right thing. So we're going to press a button, and this will handle which one we go to. But it's going to call this. Now, it's red because we need to return type IEnumerator. So for void, you return nothing. For int, you return integer. This, you have to return IEnumerator, which is special, and obviously there's other videos on that. This is not the focus of this video. All it means is anything running in here, the game will not wait for it to be executed before going to the next frame. This will just happen when it happens. So you can actually pause execution and wait and so on, and your game won't freeze. I guess the one thing you never want to do in here is have a while loop, like while 1, because then it'll just freeze your game. Actually, no, I think that's only if you put it in here. No, wait, no, it does work in it. Don't do that, basically. Yeah, just take my advice. Don't use an infinite while loop, because sometimes it crashes Unity completely and freezes. People have complained about it before. I know to avoid it, you have to do yield return null, but I'll explain that as we get to it. But we don't need to have an infinite while loop anyway. I'm just messing around. So what we want to do is we want to load the scene, right? So scene manager dot load scene. Now, as you see, we've got load scene like we have up here. So, wait, right at the top, load scene, there we go. We've got load scene async, which instead of loading the scene, it'll load the scene asynchronously in the background. So we're going to load all the data and objects and whatever it does. I don't know under the hood, but it's going to load all the stuff, and then we can go to it. So if we do load scene async, it's just going to take in an index just like the other one. It'll take in all the same types. We'll pass in the index from this function. And that's it, right? It's gonna do it. For now, we'll just have that, all right? So after that, you just write yield return null. Now, this is just the weird syntax that IEnumerators use for coroutines, but well, coroutines use to return an IEnumerator. I'm not going to get into that. Just know it's going to run this code, and we'll go to the scene, okay? So let's actually go out of this, and in here, we'll add a UI button. Now, I know there's no cameras rendering, but we can still press the button. I mean, to be honest, it's going to appear, like the other scene's going to load like instantly anyway. So we'll put this button up at the top or something. I don't know, just dock it to the top left. Doesn't really matter. Don't need to be picky about that. And just get the button to say, go to other scene. Okay? Best fit, whatever, make it a bit bigger. So if we press play, actually no, because we haven't linked the button up. Silly me. So we're going to go to the button and we're going to say, well, make sure the canvas is under the manager so it actually goes to the other scene. If you've watched my video, anything in this part of the hierarchy inside here will go to the other scene. So you might as well shove in your event systems that follows through as well. I've done a video on event systems, so I've done a video on most Unity things, but there's still plenty I haven't covered. So this button needs to drag in the manager. Well, add a function thing, drag in the manager. We're going to call scene loader dot load of a scene. There is load of a scene. Press apply, whatever, and play. So right now we're going to go to scene 1, and we're going to press go to other scene. And you're in scene 2, go to other scene 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, obviously, as you already noticed, it's very quick anyway. It's basically instant. So when we get to actually displaying loading stuff, we're not really going to get to see it. If you have a bigger game, then you'll see it if there's more to load. I also just want to put, I just don't like having this navigation thing on. There we go. So what we're going to do now is, rather than just loading this actually returns a type. As you see, it returns type async operation. So we can store that in a variable. So async operation current loading data equals. So this variable here will store all of the current loading data for the scene. Okay, and what that means is we can then access that to get some data back. So what we can say, well, it has some variables. So if we do current loading data dot, you see we have allow scene activation is done, priority progress. We have some variables on here, and we can use those variables to display on the UI how well the loading is going. Now, it's going to be basically instant because the loading an empty scene with like maybe 1 or 2 objects in. It's going to take a frame, maybe. So what we'll say is we'll say while. So while loops, you only really use in coroutines. You can use them in here in normal things, but you use them a lot in coroutines. So we're going to say while we've not loaded the scene, basically. While the scene is still loading, display the loading screen. So we'll say while not current loading data dot is done. So you see is done, has the operation finished? It'll be true if we've loaded and false if we haven't. So this will run this code inside here every frame until we've loaded. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to set it on the UI, right? We want to display how much we've loaded. So we'll write yield return null so this while loop doesn't break Unity. And we need to have a slider in here to set the value of maybe. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to add a slider in the So let's using Unity engine.ui, so we can start using UI stuff. We need to have reference to a private, serialized field private, so we can access it and drag it in. We need a slider for loading bar slider. We need some text, say the loading screen percentage text. I don't know, loading percentage text. What else do we need? I think that might be it for now. Actually, to be honest, we also need a game object because we need to be able to enable and disable the loading screen thing. So private game object loading screen load screen. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to, for now, we'll just say I don't think I need this at the end now because we've already got the return there. So when we start loading, so here, basically as soon as that starts, we want to enable a loading screen, which is just enable the panel, and then when it's done we'll disable the panel. So we'll say loading screen dot set active true. As you know, that's just how game objects work. You set them active in code, and then down here, once we've actually loaded, we're finished loading when we get to here. Loading screen dot set loading screen dot set active false. So we'll set the loading screen panel active, and then we'll set it false. So let it compile. Okay, so if we go to the canvas, we've got that button. Now on the canvas, we'll also add a panel which is over it. So panel, put this panel below. Well, it's below it, but it renders on top. So if we just set that completely opaque, we might put it. I don't know. Maybe you want like a gray. This can be loading screen panel, and under here we'll add. Well, we're not gonna add anything yet. We'll just have the loading screen panel, and we'll set it not active. And we can then go to the manager and say this is the game object panel. Now we don't actually have to set the others because we don't reference them, so we're not going to get any errors. But what I want to do is, I've already made a video on debugging, but for the sake of this, because it's going to be so fast we're not going to see it, we can at least prove that it works. So what we can do is we can put a breakpoint here and a breakpoint here. So click there and there. So what that means is we're going to pause the code and go back to this when we call that, and then when we call that. So if we press attach to Unity, the debugger is now active. So if we just, now it is. If we press play, you see that's not active. So what we'll do is, we will let it do its thing. Okay, go to the scene, boom, it goes to here. this has been called. So if we actually go in here, you'll see it's not active because we're on this frame. So if we go to the next frame, so I press step over, you'll see here now. Okay, it actually doesn't let me view it because the because when the debugger's on, you can't do anything with the scene. The point is, this was executed, right? Set active. Then it's going to go the step over. So we're going to return null. But because it was basically done in one frame, it's just gone to the next bit now. We can press continue. I can get rid of these debug things, press continue. And we're in the other scene. Now, you can actually see the loading panel going active for like, you can actually see it on here as well. It's too fast to actually see it really, to be honest. But the point is, you can see it flash up, right? We've got a loading screen that gets set active and disabled. Now, one other thing you might want to do is, let's say, well, one other way to prove it works actually. If we go back to here, we can put it just on here. Okay, just on the set active false. Press play. Go to the other scene. When we can press play, and you'll actually see it's currently active. There you go, it's active. And we'll then get rid of the breakpoint and press continue, and then it's gone. Okay, so it works. You can see it working. So what we want to do now is we want to display the loading percentage. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, as I've explained earlier, I think I explained earlier, the first 90% is the actual loading, and then the last 10% is the going to the scene. I can't remember if I mentioned that earlier, but if I haven't, basically, yeah, the first 90% of loading is shoving stuff in the scene, like, grabbing the objects, data, and everything. The last 10% is going to the scene. So we only care about the first 90% because the rest of it isn't actually going to be loaded. Like this value we get back between 0 and 1 will only go between 0 and 0.9. The last bit will just kind of jump. So we want to store the current like value, like how progress. We want this to be. We want to take the value and divide it by 0.9 because that's what we're out of. So we say equal to current loading data dot progress, and as you see, this is a value. Now it doesn't really tell you much about it. It just says the operations progress. So we'll take this and we'll divide it by 0.9, and we have to put f because it's a float. And we want this value to be between 0 and 1 because this actually, this value for the loading, for the slider we're going to use, and also the actual value is only going to be between 0 and 1. So we'll say mathf.clamp, and we want to clamp this value here between 0 and 1, like so. Unnecessary brackets there. Okay, so that's the actual value that we want. And then what we want to do with that is we actually want to set the slider's value to that amount, basically. So what we need to do is we need to say, we've got reference to slider, yeah. Okay, so once we've calculated that, we'll say slider.value, what do I actually call it? Loading bar slider. That's not indented properly. All right, dot value, so that's the actual value. Well, it's by default between 0 and 1, which we've got here. So we can say is progress. Why did I call it? It's a variable. And then that's the actual sliding bar, how far across it is, which we're going to obviously have to make the sliding bar. And then we're going to have the text as well. So loading percentage text dot text is equal to, if you haven't seen this dollar syntax, I use it a lot. If you've watched my other videos, you'll have seen it. We want to set this equal to, what should we say? We'll say loading, and then we actually want it to be in a percentage, so it's going to be 0. So we want to times it by 100. So we'll say progress times 100 percent. Can't find my keys on my keyboard. Oh, I'm in a different version. Okay, I can't actually do it with this because I'm in an older version of Unity. I need to remember to keep making my projects on the new versions. So we'll say is equal to loading, and then we have to say plus progress times that plus percentage for that to be right. But then we need to actually make sure this is rounded, otherwise it'll give us silly values. So mathf dot round to int. There we go. So that should give us a nice value. Now obviously it's gonna be quite hard to see that because it's gonna be so fast. But anyway, let's now make the actual visuals for this. So if we go to the loading screen panel, when it lets us, we want to set it active so we can quickly drop in a UI slider, and we want to scale this up and get rid of the stupid let's just move it down. That's usually where bars are. Alright, let me just fix this. We don't want to handle fix all these values. Okay, so the slider between 0 and 1, let's just make the fill color not white. Don't want it to be black either. There you go. So we want to link that up, and we want to add some text as well. So with the slider, we'll add some UI text. Make sure it's white so we can actually see it. Make the max size a bit bigger. And we don't really care, we'll just put some text. I mean, who cares? It's gonna go in code, it's gonna change it. We'll leave it like that. So if I just go back to the manager, press apply. Now it wants reference to this, so slider here, text here, apply. And if we now, obviously we're not really gonna see it, make sure to set this panel not active because we actually want to do that in code. If we go attach to Unity, so it puts the debugger on, and we perhaps do this here, the breakpoint to pause it, we press play. We're gonna go to the other scene when it lets us, and you click out. Oh wait, it's let me guess. Yeah, it did it too fast. Basically, that's already done. Attached to Unity. Well, as you see there, actually, you can see it loading like instantly. If only I had more stuff to obviously show this off with. I guess what we can do is we can put it there, and then you can press go to scene and see it. See, actually, it doesn't like to show it, apparently, if you do it there. I guess we could just put it here like we did earlier. Press continue. There you go. There's a loading bar. It's going to say 100% because it does it in one frame, but the point is if it wasn't, then we would have, you know, proper values here in this bar. We'd see it going up. So in your bigger games, then this will be more visible. But basically, the whole thing's here. You know, let's just turn off the debugger now. We can go between scenes. We've got loading bar. It's obviously better if you, as I say, well, you can kind of see it go between 0 and 100 if you see very quickly. But the point is, in bigger games, you'll actually see it, and when you want the player to not be staring at a blank screen, you might want them to see the progress so they at least know your game's loading, for example. It's a good thing, and lots of people want loading screens, so I'm hoping people liked this video. If you did like the video, then obviously leave a like and subscribe, leave other video ideas in the comments below, but apart from that, thanks for watching, and goodbye.